Supporting evidence. The evidence will be presented in 4 areas: fossils, anatomy comparisons, DNA and protein sequence comparisons, and animal embryo comparisons. Fossils are preserved when sedimentary rock forms around the remains of living things. Very old layers of sedimentary rock can be lifted to the surface by plate tectonics, giving us access to old fossils. We know how old fossils are because we can tell the age of the rock in which they are preserved. Numerous fossil discoveries allow us to trace the evolution of living species to their extinct ancestors. The deepest layers of rock are the oldest layers. Fossils tell us about the bodies of extinct species and how species have changed. For many living species, such as the horse, we have very complete fossil records, with teeth and bone samples from many time points. Look at the changes in the forefeet and teeth of the horse over the last 55 million years. They show change over time, evolution, from Hyracotherium to Equus. The best fossil evidence for evolution are transitional fossils. Transitional fossils are from extinct species, but they show us the intermediate body plans between old and new types of species. They show a path from ancestors to their descendants. They possess features of both the ancestors and their descendants. Since evolution is the change in populations over time, it is supported by physical evidence of intermediate steps, transitions from old to new. Anatomy is the study of body structures. When we compare the anatomies of different types of organisms, we see similar structures used over and over again, but in each species, the structure may have changed over time and become adapted to carry out different functions. The best explanation is that they evolved from a common ancestor with these characteristics. This is evidence for descent with modification. All the skeletons in this picture are from different species, but they all have skulls, backbones, forelimbs, and ribs. Evidence for descent with modification from a common ancestor. Homologous structures are parts of animals that look similar to parts of other animals, even if they perform different functions. They are evidence for a common ancestor. The figure on the next slide shows limb bones of 4 different mammals. They are labeled with the functions that each perform for the identified mammal. Here we have a human arm. It's used for grabbing, throwing, holding, and fine manipulation. Here we have a cat leg, or cat limb, that's used for jumping, landing, and running. Here, in a whale, that same appendage is used for swimming and changing direction, and in a bat, it's used for flying. Natural selection placed pressure on ancient populations. Not all organisms could get enough to eat, avoid predators, and reproduce in their ecosystems. Variations in limbs that could help swim, fly, walk on land, hold things, or dig in soil were advantageous for the individuals that had them. Over millions of years, the limbs changed and new species emerged as adaptations were selectively passed to offspring. The Galapagos finches are evidence for a common ancestor as shown in this tree of life. Their populations evolved over time as finches with the right beak for the seeds in their environment were able to survive and reproduce more. The central paradigm of biology, DNA to RNA to protein, leads to structure and function. You and your family members have similar body structures. Perhaps you have the same nose as one of your parents. Perhaps you have the same hair as one of your siblings. That makes sense. You share DNA inherited from your ancestors. If you saw these 4 people on the street, you would be able to tell that these children are related to the adults in the picture. They look alike and they share DNA. DNA and protein sequences all depend on a universal genetic code. All cells carry out transcription and translation to make proteins using the same system with exactly the same code. The process is the same in every living cell on Earth. The universal code is shown on the next slide. DNA to RNA to protein. All species share genes required to carry out basic cellular processes. By comparing these gene and protein sequences, we can gather evidence about how closely related one species is to others. Like anatomy comparisons, DNA and protein comparisons give evidence for descent with modification. Very early in development, when an animal is an embryo inside an egg or a uterus, the embryos of different species resemble one another. All animals share similar genetic programs that control early development, which is strong evidence that all animals share a common ancestor. As we grow and develop, other genes go to work and species' unique adaptations become more apparent.